Managing a small team or business comes with a unique set of challenges. With limited resources and manpower, it's easy for things to feel chaotic and out of your control. How can you, as a leader, accomplish your goals while keeping your team engaged, effective, and accountable? This podcast will give you practical strategies you can implement now to lead your team or business to reach its fullest potential. Welcome to the Organizing Chaos podcast with your host, Danny Coleman.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Organizing Chaos, where we talk about small practical strategies for small teams and small businesses. And today I have Dr. Allison Duke, who is the professor, or the associate dean rather, and the associate professor of management at Lipscomb University. So a really smart person who's going to talk to us about management, good management practices and principles. Really excited to have her on. Allison, thank you so much for being on my show.
Yeah, I'm glad to be with you today.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about just kind of a brief, history of your kind of how you got to be in the position that you're at now, kind of what led you there, and then we'll kind of talk about, some other stuff.
Sure. Well, after college, I taught high school for a year and decided I did not want to continue in that career path, so I made a change into the field of human resources. When I was getting my MBA, I decided that I'd really like to teach college. I love teaching, but thought the college level would be fun to try. So I quit my job after I finished my MBA and went and got a PhD at the University of Mississippi. And I've been back at Lipscomb for 12 years now.
Okay, wow. So what were you going to originally teach in high school, or were you wanting to?
I taught business.
Oh, okay, gotcha. So you still
always had a
in mind.
background.
So I went to a small Christian college, a private Christian college in Knoxville for a little while. And my business class was my favorite one. At the time, I didn't really know why, I don't think. My favorite teacher was my business teacher. It's fun to look back and kind of see certain things about yourself. You're like, okay, so I am still on the sort of that track. But cool, wow. So, and how long have you been at Lipscomb now?
This is my 12th year, yeah.
Okay, wow. And as far as, I know that you've also mentioned to me a conversation we had previously, you do a little bit of consulting on the side, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And what's that kind of look like for you? Like, what kind of people are you working with?
I really work with any size companies, everything from small startups to larger corporations, but it's really about trying to help companies build their teams to manage their processes better. My passion is really about getting teams to function more effectively together. So understanding each other and understanding how to manage their employees better. Gotcha.
Yeah. So we'll dig in a little bit to that, because that's kind of how I see management itself. So I'm a lot more self-educated. I know I've told you my story before. And so what I've learned, or what I've observed at least, and I'd like to hear kind of your thoughts on this, is like you basically, when it comes down to it, you got two kind of aspects of management. You got the management of the human element, and then there's like the process element. And so with the human element, it's a lot harder. And I find that like a lot of organizations I've either worked with or for, whether it's small business or large corporations, they try to rely a lot on the process side of things to try to control people and get them to, kind of produce consistently and stuff like that. So that is all very important, the process element. But I'd like to talk a lot more today about the human element, because I think that's the harder thing to nail down. And so in your experience, what are some of the things that you've learned in your, the extensive studying you've done that has maybe contradicted previously kind of held notions about management or leadership, or anything that maybe would have surprised you that maybe you wouldn't have assumed, or something like that?
Sure. There's a lot of things that surprise me, because we're dealing with human behavior, and there's a lot of variability in how people react. We can do personality assessments and those types of things to try to predict how people will act in certain situations. And we can narrow it down to how they might act in stressful situations, but there's just so much variability. Even on a Myers Briggs, there's 16 different types. So if you have 30 employees reporting to you, you could have, 30 different personalities. And so that predictability becomes really difficult to manage, because in reality, as managers, we're still trying to do our job, and all the processes and all the tasks But then we have this people side too that demands a lot of our attention. One of the most interesting things that I've seen in the research is just what motivates people. Corporations have typically tried to rely on financial incentives to motivate people, and they do motivate people. But I've found it fascinating to find other ways to motivate people that really don't cost companies significant amounts of money, as much as it does time and energy on your management side.
What are some of those non-financial motivations?
Yeah, so the research tells us, and this is all out of Drive by Daniel Pink, and so based on his research, so it's very academically based research, but we know that three things really motivate people: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So the autonomy is you get to decide how you do your work. You get to decide when you do your work in some situations. Some jobs are more amenable to this than others. I mean, if you're a nurse, you can't really decide when you're going to do your job. It's right. During your shift. Yeah. But how you do your job, and even maybe you do all the tasks you're supposed to do, but then you get a certain percentage of your job to work on whatever you want that can help the company. So that autonomy and getting to make our own decisions and not being so prescriptive in our jobs. Mastery is about getting better at something. We want to learn. You said you were self-taught. So all those books that you read, all the podcasts that you've listened to, we all do it. Some of us have extra hobbies. We learn to play musical instruments or get better at golf. I'm trying to learn how to fly fish better, or at least catch fish. So any of those things that we do, it's really about getting better at something, and we keep doing it even if we're bad at it, because we want to get better at something. And then the purpose motive is, I mean, it's what it sounds like. It's that we have some purpose in our jobs. And every company, I mean, a lot of people will say business is about making money, and it is. But nonprofits have to have money to exist and continue helping people. Yeah. So that purpose motive, every business was started for some reason. They filled some gap, they filled some need. And so there's a purpose in every job, and it's about trying to tap into that and help employees see that purpose in their day-to-day interactions.
So, that's great. That's Drive by Daniel Pink, you said?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as like some of the things where it comes to like different organizations, it can be difficult to kind of maybe find what the purpose is, you know, like the larger purpose, right? Like, you know, like, okay, well, we sell these widgets, you know. Do you have any kind of recommendations on how like either managers or owners can is there any kind of exercise or book maybe or something like that can help them do that?
If you read The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni, there's actually 6 critical questions that every leadership team should answer. And I mean, they're questions like, what do we do? What's most important right now? But one of the critical questions is, why do we exist? And some of this goes back to Simon Sinek's work, and he's got a book called Why. And so really spending time as a leadership team to say, why do we exist? And are we making decisions that support this why? And if you're doing that as a senior leadership team, you can be much more intentional about helping people who are in their cubicles every day, crunching the numbers. You can see that. And sometimes it's, I'm going to spend some time with customers. There's a great example in one of the books about hospital janitors. And the hospital janitors, I mean, they get rated on how clean a hospital room is. Well, if you're just doing that day after day, it's like, okay, I got to get this room clean. But when they allowed the janitors to spend time with the families who had been in those rooms or who were getting ready to come into those rooms, you can see that purpose. So it's a totally different experience. And it doesn't have to be something that you see every single day, but you have that reminder of, this is why we exist and why our jobs are important.
Wow, that's really good. Yeah, I found that like sometimes when you try to introduce like a team to like the ideas of like purpose and stuff like that, and it's not previously been there, it's almost like it's hard to not feel forced or awkward about it. You know what I'm saying? Do you have any kind of recommendations in terms of like maybe someone who's just kind of coming up on these sort of epiphanies or realizations that they should be doing with their team or with their business? Any kind of recommendations as far as how to sort of introduce that to their team?
I mean, to your point, it can seem false. I think a lot of that really goes back to having the trust built with your team that your intentions are good, for the company and for the team. So having that trust building activity, even on the front end, and maybe it's with your leadership team. You go on a 2-day retreat and you spend some time really starting to build the trust, getting to know each other, understanding each other, starting to build some accountability for, I mean, you said you're going to do this, and we're going to actually hold you accountable to that. So that's what builds what we call vulnerability based trust. And if the employees in your company trust you and trust that you have their best interest at heart, that's where you can get that purpose piece discussed. It doesn't feel forced or doesn't feel fake. If you don't have that trust from your employees, that's when it does come off as fake, and it's just this exercise that you're going through to make you feel good.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you too was like, and this is a great way to segue into it, is so there's a lot of middle managers who are dealing with people above them that maybe don't care about these things, or they're just poorly executing them or whatever. What are things that they can do to try to, before quitting, besides quitting and going to another organization, what can they do to maybe try to, I was just talking about like this the other day with the guy, I think it's like manage up or whatever, like, or manage up, but then also, figure out how to kind of be that gap. That's what managers are lots of times. We find ourselves in the gap between the owner or the, whoever's our manager, and then who our direct reports are. And, there's like this tug there. And so like, what do you do, I guess, when, what are some of the impactful things you can do when you're in that situation?
I mean, managing up is where I would generally start with that conversation. There's lots of research-based ways that you can do that. I mean, it's things like being the go-to person, being the expert in something, taking on more work than other people do. But a lot of that really just goes back to building trust with your manager. So if you want to be seen as a really good middle manager, you have trust with the people who report to you, and they think that you have their back. But then you've got to build the trust with the person on the upper end too, to say, hey, I'm your go-to person. Trust me. Because if you have that trusting relationship, then you can go to the manager and say, hey, I don't think that we're doing everything we could to be a great team. And I have some ideas about how we could do that better. You can't have that conversation if you're not seen as credible, and the expert and the go-to person. And so sometimes we just want to complain. My manager doesn't understand what's going on. They don't see the big picture. They're not in it every day. You can all complain about it. But to get that manager to actually do something, you have to have a relationship with him or her, or you can't get that buy-in even on the upper end.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And that's it's like that's a really good way of putting it. I think that, and it's not, it almost like you don't want to ever feel like manipulative when you do it, but it's like when that when you're convicted that something could work really well a different way, I think that it's your obligation to do that. I used to have there was a team that I was on before, and some of the managers who were kind of on my level in the org chart, if you will, would, were like expressing like, oh man, like we're not able to do, XYZ, and I'd be like, why? Like, have you told, boss about it? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, you've told him this and he's not responding? He responds to me, like I don't feel like I got anything kind of magical, and kind of what I ended up coming to, and I don't know, this isn't a very academic way of saying it or whatever, but I was just, you got to fall on your sword about every decision that you have when you're trying to manage up, I think, because it's like those people have whoever's managing you, or the owners, or, again, maybe like, whatever executives above you, they've got a level of conviction that has got them to where they're at, like, I think that's the way I describe it, is conviction. And so if you don't try to match that conviction with the things that you think need to change or whatever, then I think, yeah, you're probably going to not be heard. But I think that if you're kind of falling on your sword about those things and they're not hearing you, then it might be time to consider like looking elsewhere.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of us do poorly as managers, is just having enough self-awareness that we need to change and we need to do something differently.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are some of the things that you would recommend as far that a manager could like take action on, like kind of quickly, like some tactics or like things they could do? So we talked about There's mastery, autonomy, and purpose. So how can you kind of usher those into your team?
Sure. I mean, I think it's really, you have to have some time to think through it. We all get busy in our day to day,
Mhm.
and you just look down and it's 5 o'clock and it's, well, I didn't really think about that at all today. I was just doing my job.
Yeah.
So I think actually being much more intentional about how do I make this team better. And here's the other thing, it really has to do with the individual person. Some people, so I can say autonomy is great. Some people want their checklist of here's everything I need to do. I'm going to check that off. I'm going to do it. I'm going to go home. And you need those people on your team, and they may or may not want as much autonomy as somebody else who you're saying, okay, if I just let them run with it, let's see what they do. Let's give them the space to have the creativity. So you start to evaluate every one of your team members to say, okay, if I know that autonomy, mastery, and purpose motivates people, what fits best for this individual person? Is it, you know, I like my job, but this isn't what I want to do for the next 10 years, which almost nobody does anymore.
Mhm.
So maybe I can get a lot more out of this person right now because I'm going to help them get better at something. I'm going to give them more projects. I'm going to give them more responsibility. I'm going to let them go take a class somewhere, or maybe I'm just going to give them some resources to LinkedIn Learning or whatever that is, where they feel like they're growing and doing something different. But that might work for one employee and not the other.
Mhm.
So you really have to spend time understanding what is it that this person really wants out of this job and out of this company, and that requires spending time with people.
Would you say that is like that you kind of have two camps of people? If you like,
Mhm.
with the people who maybe don't want as much autonomy and want the checklist and whatnot versus the people who do want more autonomy? Is
Yeah,
that a
I
good
mean,
way to kind of like classify?
there's some research on A players and B players, and your A players are your, what I would say, type A's. They're
Mhm.
the ones who want to compete, they want to get it done, they want to move up. Those are the ones who probably want more autonomy. There's certain personality types that want more autonomy. Your intuitives on the Myers Briggs likely want a little more autonomy in deciding how they do their job.
Mhm.
Your perceivers on Myers Briggs likely need a little more autonomy. And you don't have to go sit down and give somebody their Myers Briggs, but understanding, okay, this is a person who likes to come in. They want me to provide them exactly what it is I want to do, or they need to get done, and they're going to leave. That's what we would call a B player. They do their job. They're the steady eddies. They're the ones who show up. You need those people, and if you want those people to be happy, give them the structure, give them the detail, and they can check the box. But then start to notice, okay, this other person's getting a little frustrated over here because I'm trying to do the same thing for my B player who
Mhm.
needs all the instructions and the box check. I'm doing that for this other person, and that's frustrating the heck out of them.
Yeah.
And they want the autonomy to decide how to do it on their own. So one thing that a lot of companies have implemented that I think is generally successful is having one-on-one meetings with all of your direct reports at least once a week. Now, if you have 30 direct reports, that's
Yeah.
all you would do a week.
Yeah.
But if you have a reasonable number of direct reports, 6 to 8, that's something you could carve out 30 minutes once a week that you're
Yeah.
spending time with them. And you can use a little bit more of a coaching method. It's not just, okay, here's our laundry list of things we need to get done.
Yeah.
It's 5 minutes on that, and then 25 minutes of what's frustrating you, what's getting in your way of getting your job done, where do you want to go. When you're asking those kinds of questions, you can start to understand the motivations a little bit more.
That's good. That's really good. Do you, besides like maybe administering like the Myers-Briggs test, which I think is a good idea, are there any other kind of tools that can maybe help you identify, like, because I think I have a bad habit of doing that. I'll interrupt myself. But like to back up, when you are dealing with like when you were saying your A's and your B's, the people
Mm-hmm.
who want more autonomy versus less autonomy, it's hard. It's definitely harder to tell on the B people
Sure.
whether they're just disengaged
Mm-hmm.
or if they're, a B person or whatever.
Right.
So do you have any, I mean, besides the Myers-Briggs, is there anything else maybe that would be kind of help you figure that out before you, stress them out and burn them?
Yeah, I think that's really those weekly conversations, because you can start to see the people who, I've had employees in the past who they want to come in, they want to do a good job, and you can still sit there excited about doing a good job. When they start to withdraw and they don't care as much about getting the job done correctly, then you might have some disengagement. They're leaving early. They just, they're on their phone looking at text messages instead of doing the work. When they start to become unengaged from the work, that's when you have a motivation problem. When it's simply, I just want to come in, do my job, get it done, go home, watch Netflix, but they're still showing up and doing a good job, that might be your B player. But you don't necessarily know that until you're spending a little more time with that person.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so outside of maybe these meetings, like if you do have a large group, like how you talked about, like maybe you're reporting to 30 people or 30 people reporting to you, do you feel like, is that something, should you suggest to management, like, hey, let's put another layer in here so that I can have some people that I manage who can help me, or like, what's a good thing to do in that situation? Because I feel like managing 30 people is a bit insane.
Yeah. I mean, I worked in a company once that one of our managers had 78 direct reports.
That's nuts.
You have to have some team leads in there, because if you want to manage well, you can manage. But if you want to manage well, you really need to have a number of people who, a reasonable number of direct reports. So 10 or fewer tends to be a little bit easier to manage. And that varies by company. It varies by the type of task that they're doing. You may spend all your time together because you work in an open environment and you get to know people and you're spending time with them, versus even people who are working remotely, or people who are in different buildings, or, the answer to everything in management is it depends. But generally speaking, we want to have a reasonable number of direct reports. And it may not be that you even have to put a second layer of management. It might be, hey, we're going to have this team lead in here who's somebody who can help with the development piece of that. So I think that would be the best approach.
That's good. So kind of, I guess maybe part sort of goes along with that is, the team building, the trust building stuff we talked about a little bit earlier. In my experience, it's always been like some type of, we do something together. So you're going to, we've been to like Colorado and gone skiing together, or, you might have like a retreat or something like that, like a 1 or 2 day retreat where it's a little bit more structured and you're kind of doing some team building type of things or whatever. Do you have any kind of recommendations in terms of like how you can do that as a middle manager, where it's not necessarily like company policy to do that, but you want to try to, get your team bonding?
Yeah. The team building stuff is great. And I would absolutely encourage that. I do think that that's kind of gotten a bad reputation. Some people think, well, I'm going to have to spend a day away from work while I go do this fun thing. And then I come back to work and I still have all my work that I got to catch up on. So you've gotten a little bit of resistance on that over the years, unless you just have a group that loves to go have fun together. And then it's, what does everybody like to do? So you have all of that too. What I think works really well, and I keep going back to Patrick Lencioni's model and the advantage, but you're spending some time really understanding how you approach work. So part of that is understanding why people do the things that they do. You can do that with Myers Briggs. That's a very simple tool you can do. There's tons of tools out there. Some are free, some are paid for. But understanding this is why this person approaches work the way that he or she approaches work. So that's one piece. And then the next piece is really trying to get stuff out on the table, which is how you start managing a little bit of conflict. How you start to really hold each other accountable. And that can get a little uncomfortable. But until you can have a conversation with somebody that said, you know what, you let us down on that, and you didn't follow through like you said you're going to follow through. Until you can have those kind of conversations, it's not really a team, you're a group. Everybody can get along. And in the South, we all act like we get along, and then we go talk about each other and, behind their backs. So we want to get past that and say, I need to just address this conflict with you. This is something that is bothering me. We're not functioning well together, and let's get this out in the open. That's what I would consider true team building. And you can do that in conjunction with the fun stuff. I think you can have the fun stuff too. But I think it's more than just spending time together trying to escape out of a room. It's how do I get to the point where I can have that hard conversation with you and it's not weird.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think like what makes, all this much more difficult is the fact that, you're trying to figure out how to do this at work. Well, a lot of people can't even do this at home,
right.
or in their private life. So you're asking someone to grow at work, but hopefully, you grow back at home. That's kind of like my goal with management and kind of in doing what I'm doing is that, like, I feel like because people spend so much time at work, if you can figure out how to make their lives better at work, then they'll go home and actually be better, and they'll feed back into their personal life. So I think it's a noble thing. And I think that like learning how to get people to work together is peace on earth, right? That's like literally, it's like if we can all figure out how to understand each other and, and work together better, then, I think you just have a better world all around. So
absolutely.
I could talk to you all day about this kind of stuff. And in fact, if you're interested, I might hit you up again for a future interview. I would like to, I think when you kind of started to talk about the conflict stuff, that's a little bit less fun, but I'd be more interested to learn more about that. Cause I think that's something that people do shy away from. And,
sure.
And I think I have like a handful of like relationships where I feel like we do that well. Mm-hmm. And I think that it is difficult to bring that, especially if, like you said, you have a group, if you can't do that. And I think I've definitely been a part of some of those teams where it was a group, but we weren't a team because we weren't really addressing a lot of that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, so I'll shoot you an email and maybe we can do this again. Recap real quick. So the two books I know you mentioned during the episode were The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni, mm-hmm. and then Drive by Daniel Pink.
Yes.
Cool. Did you have any other big recommendations?
I'm gonna turn really quickly on the screen. I'm gonna look at my bookshelf. Radical Candor is a great book talking about the conflict that we just talked about. So that's a good one. Even Grit by Angela Duckworth is a great book about understanding work ethic and getting people who are dedicated and motivated to do their job. So those are two of the more recent ones that I've read. Brene Brown, all of her stuff is, Dare to Lead is another great one that really is about that vulnerability-based trust and building that with your team. So those are three easy ones that I'd tell anybody to pick up. Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. So thank you again for being on the show. Is there anything that you'd like to share with the general public? Anything coming up that you'd like to bring attention to? Or is there, any way that if people want to reach out to you and work with you in some way, do you want to share? Sure. No, I'm happy to talk to anybody about getting their team more effective and building that trust and working through that process. And so if anybody wants to get in touch with me, happy for them to shoot me an email. Great. Do you want to say your email on here? Oh, yeah, sure. It's Allison. It's ALLISON .Duke, DUKE @lipscomb.edu. Sweet. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being on. I really, really, really enjoyed it. It's one of my favorite episodes for sure. And everyone who tuned in, thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to work with Allison, write down that email, back up the podcast or the video a little bit, write it down, shoot her an email. If you want to get in touch with me and you want to be interviewed on my podcast, or you have anything of value you'd like to share with small teams, small business managers, you can shoot me an email, Danny@DannyColeman.me. You can follow me at Instagram at @IamDannyColeman. I appreciate your podcast reviews. And if you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe. Anyways, thanks again, Allison, for being on, and we'll see you later. All right. Thanks, Danny. Thanks.
Want more? Go to DannyColeman.me to download Danny's free small business hiring guide, which includes tips, templates, and tools, plus a step-by-step process you can use to find and keep high-quality employees for your small team or business.